It was a few years back, during a road trip with my buddy Jake. We were cruising through the desert, chasing that feeling of freedom you only get on the open road, but little did we know, we were about to encounter something that would shatter that sense of freedom and leave us fighting for our lives. We were driving through Navajo territory, miles away from civilization, when we saw it. A figure standing by the side of the road, illuminated by the headlights of our car. At first, we thought it was just a trick of the light, but as we got closer, we realized it was something else entirely. It looked like a man, but there was something off about him. His eyes glowed in the darkness, and his limbs too long, too twisted, and then, just as quickly as we saw him, he vanished into the desert night. We tried to shake it off, telling ourselves it was just our imaginations running wild, but as we continued down the road, things took a turn for the worse. We started hearing strange noises outside the car, scratching at the windows, whispers on the wind. Jake laughed it off, but I could tell he was nervous. I was too, and then, without warning, something slammed into the side of the car, sending us careening off the road and into the desert. The car flipped over and everything went dark. When I came to, Jake was nowhere to be found. I stumbled out of the wreckage, calling out for him, but all I heard was the sound of my own voice echoing through the desert. I searched for hours, but there was no sign of him. That's when I saw it, the figure from before, standing on a nearby ridge, watching me with those glowing eyes. I knew then what we were dealing with, a Skinwalker, a creature of Navajo legend, able to take on the form of any animal or human it chooses. I didn't waste any time. I ran as fast as I could, the sound of my heart pounding in my ears, but no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, hunting me, waiting for the right moment to strike. It took me days to make it back to civilization, days filled with fear and paranoia, and when I finally reached help, I told them everything about the Skinwalker, about Jake, about the nightmare that had become my reality. But no one believed me. They said it was just a trick of the desert, a figment of my imagination. But I know the truth. I know what I saw that night, and I'll never forget it. The desert may be vast and empty, but it's also home to things that lurk in the shadows, things that are better left undisturbed. And if you ever find yourself driving through the desert at night, remember one thing: beware the Skinwalker, for it is always watching, always waiting, and it will stop at nothing to claim its prey. It was a weekend. I was out hunting in the northern forests of Wisconsin. I was walking through the woods. It was near dark when I came across a clearing. It couldn't have been more than 50 feet in diameter. Then I saw it, the largest buck I had ever seen. I then laid down on my stomach and pointed my rifle at its heart. The buck must have heard me as it looked in my direction, but it didn't see me, so it went back to grazing in the field. As I pulled the trigger of my rifle, a large branch snapped behind, and I thought I saw a wolf running off beside me, causing me to flinch and miss my shot, hitting the buck in the side of the torso as the buck let out a scream. I know I had hit something important as its side was gushing blood. It still ran, but I knew it would die at some point soon from its wound. I just had to follow the blood as it ran. I followed the blood trail for a few minutes before coming across a much larger clearing, at least 300 feet in diameter, and I saw movement at the other end of the clearing. Thinking it was the bug, I got back onto my stomach and chest and aimed my scope at the movement to see what it was. Seeing a wolf eating the bug. I was disappointed the wolf had killed the buck before I could, but I just watched it, in awe by the cruelty yet beauty of nature. But then I saw something. Was that a hand where the wolf's paw should be? No, it couldn't be. It must just be a scratch from the wolf, but did it have human teeth? I shifted a bit in my spot to try and see better, snapping a twig. There's no way the wolf could have heard me, but its head then snapped up to me on the small raised plateau I was on. It looked like it had human eyes, and it looked like it smiled at me, and it then stood up on its hind legs, still looking at me. Deer's throat gripped in its long-fingered hand. This scared me so much, I dropped my rifle, and in the second it took me to look down and grab my rifle again, the wolf was already halfway across the clearing. There was no way it could have gotten there that fast. As I looked back up at it, it stopped running, still looking at me. What the fuck? I whispered under my breath, terrified. I stayed where I was and stood up with my rifle aimed at it, still looking at the wolf. There was no way it could be a wolf, but the one thing I've learned from my 16 years of hunting and camping, never turn your back on and run from a predator that was hunting you. The wolf then opened its mouth like it was yawning, but then it let out a scream that sounded part human scream, part howl, and part animalistic screech, as it then looked like the wolf frowned at me, like it was disappointed in me standing my ground, before walking back to the deer and crouching down before continuing to eat it, as I then turned and ran for at least an hour back to my car, that horrifying scream playing in my head on repeat before I practically dived into my car. It was the happiest I'd ever been to see that old piece of shit in my entire life. As I then drove home, I didn't turn on the radio, I just drove in silence. When I got back home, I just cried in my car from fear of what had happened and joy from finally being safe for at least 5 minutes before finally getting out of the car and running into my house. Locking every door and window and pulling every curtain shut. If you ever go hunting in the woods of northern Wisconsin, do not stay. If you come across a wolf eating those things, don't like it when you stare. My day started off pretty normal. At 6:30, my alarm woke me up, and I proceeded with my normal routine, such as I showered, brushed my teeth, and threw my hiking gear on. I'm a pretty avid hiker, wouldn't say very experienced, but I know what I'm doing, so I go every weekend when I can. Around 7:30, that was when I was ready to drive to my chosen hiking route, Basalt Mountain, Colorado. This was about a 3-hour drive from where I live, so I was pretty exhausted by the time I got there after being up so early. The hike started off great. The sun was beaming down on me, and I could hear all the birds singing and all the critters running around in the forests. Along my route that I chose, there was gorgeous views and amazing scenery, so I stopped whenever I could to take in the views and just live in the moment. A few times I stopped to make myself a coffee and to take some stunning photos for my friends back home in the UK. However, by the time I got to the top, I realized it was getting dark. This is when I noticed I was walking back in the dark. This is where it started to get creepy. On my way back down, I had a sharp feeling on the back of my head, like someone was watching me. I chose to ignore it and carried on walking. The thing is, though, the more I walked and the darker it got, the feeling kept getting more intense. In an act to distract myself, I whistled the tune to my favorite song. This is when I could hear someone walk behind me in the distance, but not too far to not hear them. Too far to see them, though. I kept glancing behind me and kept seeing nothing. Looked to my left and right, and still nothing. As I kept on walking, I could still hear it following me, and that sharp feeling of being watched was getting unbearable. About 40 minutes passed since setting off back down, and I didn't notice whatever was following has been slowly getting closer. I realized this when I looked behind me about the 100th time, and this time I saw a deer. This wasn't a normal deer either. This deer looked like if it was dead, but somehow still alive. It had red glowing eyes locked right onto me, its skin all patchy and some of it hanging off too. Bones were sticking out of its limbs and chest, blood also dripping from its mouth. It just wasn't natural. By the time it sunk in to what I was looking at, it started walking to me at a fast pace. That ain't normal either, I thought. Then it hit me. I'm gonna die if I don't run. I flung my body around and started sprinting for my life with every ounce of energy I had. That's when I heard it. That shrill scream from behind sounded half human, half coyote. The human half sounded like a death scream. It sent chills down my spine and my shit into my pants. Footsteps were getting faster and closer behind me, but I kept on pushing. My legs were burning and my lungs screaming. I wanted to quit. That's when it was close enough I could hear it grunting. I was shitting myself. After running for what felt like an eternity later, I built up the courage to look over my shoulder. This was a mistake. What I saw was no longer a deer. What I was looking at was roughly 7 feet tall. It had abnormally long limbs, and it was insanely skinny, with barely any muscle on its frame. What skin it had was gray and hanging from its limbs and torso, just like the deer. Some of it was human skin, some of it was animal skin. From what I could make out, the animal skin could have been from a deer or even a coyote. What creeped me out the most was its face. Well, lack of. 2 hollow and black pits replaced the eyes, and it had a gaping mouth with bloody razor-sharp teeth. Panic truly set in. Then I heard the scream again. At the same time, it swiftly swung its dangly arm at me, which had pointy, sharp, long fingers attached at the end of it. Ducking out the way of its arm, it managed to tear a chunk of flesh from my right shoulder. Blinding with pain, I tripped and fell down an embankment. Rolling down it, I missed a few trees, but smashed into one of them. Winded, I feebly tried getting up, but to no avail. This was useless. My ankle was severely sprained, and I had no strength to get myself up off the ground. In a desperate attempt, I dragged myself into a bush so it couldn't see me. It was pitch black at this point. Rummaging around in my backpack like a madman, I clung onto my knife. Laying there in agonizing pain and wheezing, I could hear it grunting, walking around looking for me. I was shaking uncontrollably. I thought I was gonna die. After laying in the bush for what felt like hours, listening to it patrol the area around me and grunting, I had a moment of stupidity. Looking out of the bush, I no longer saw the 7-foot figure. I saw the silhouette of a deer feet away from me. With every ounce of courage and energy I had, I leapt out of the bush, throwing my body and my knife at the deer. Driving my knife into its skull, I could hear the crunching of the bone and the squelching of flesh, and a cold, vicious liquid cover my hand. At the same time, an inhuman scream, similar to the screams before that came from the deer. The deer fell limp, and so did my body next to it. Hoping I killed it and it's not gonna kill me, I passed out from exhaustion. Waking up hours later with the sun beaming down on my face with its warm rays, I realized I was still alive. However, the deer must be as well. Getting up and looking around, there was no sight of the deer, nor my knife, just a blood trail going back to where I was running from. Then I heard the same scream again from the same direction. Panic rushing my body again. I sprinted down the trail, still hearing the same scream over and over, getting closer and getting back to my car, throwing myself into it, and sped to the closest hospital. That's the day I truly believed skinwalkers are real, and I managed to survive. Somehow.